this recording, right? Okay, so welcome everyone to the February SAN coordinator call. This is a very special time of year. Every year in February, we have developed a Bring Your Senior Leader annual call. And you may say, well, why do we do that? What is the impetus behind that? And I will tell you that it is one of those happy accidents that occurred during COVID. We were trying to find different ways to engage folks. Prior to COVID, we used to have many in-person types of activities, whether they be workshops, as well as meetings at the WCET annual meeting and the NASAPS meeting. We still continue those, but we have fewer workshops than we used to in person. And we certainly didn't have any during the COVID years. So we wanted to develop some other ways to share with everyone what SAN does, and also to help our people who meet with us on a regular basis be able to share with their senior leaders the value of the State Authorization Network. So we were very pleased to have our first year of that, and we've decided that when we've learned from our members that they appreciate this opportunity. So in order to have this, we think it's really important to share a little bit about SAN's origin. So SAN is located within WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, the regional compact in the West. So you may be saying, well, Cheryl, why is SAN part of WICHE, which is in the West? Is it just a Western organization? And the answer is no. We're a national organization housed within WICHE. And the reason for that is that WICHE in 1989 created WCET, the WICHE Cooperative for Educational Technologies, that addresses the policy and practice and advocacy for digital learning. Specifically to SAN, we saw in 2011, actually it was in 2010 that it was released, but in 2010 was the release of the first iteration of the federal regulation for state authorization. That prompted WCET to develop the State Authorization Network in the spring of 2011. And the reason for that was to develop a group atmosphere to try to handle this state-to-state authorization requirements, as this was before reciprocity, several years before. So SAN was developed on a train-the-trainer model. We had small groups of consortia and systems that were training the institutions within their groups. We've grown since then. We're now up to 962 institutions and organizations nationwide, and it's been 15 years coming up this April that we have had this organization together. So we're very pleased to have this opportunity. And the opportunity that we do is that we at SAN share with our members the nuance and the legal basis to develop practices to be compliant with state and federal statutes and regulation in regard to out-of-state activity compliance and related requirements. So we do this by offering training, resources, and facilitating the networking. We learned from my former executive director, Russ Poulin, the thought that we are better together in being able to resolve some of these compliance matters. I hear often from members that they are the only one at their institution that does this work. And so we find that it's very important to have a collaborative group to be able to share how to manage requirements. And so when we talk about our ability to share resource, I'm going to put something in the chat. You'll find that our website is very helpful, and very specifically is our library of resources. And our library of resources is found on the Getting Started page. And there you'll see a number of 1- and 2-pagers that are very topic specific to get you a quick hit on, what is something specific that you want to learn about, whether it be serving military students, how to write a public comment, some opportunities about project management. So you'll find some quick papers around those areas. And then we also have charts, and we have longer papers and handbooks. So it's a real diverse group of resources that you can use for the development of your structures at your institution. And as a matter of fact, today, at the end of our meeting, we're going to have our colleague, Catherine Kerensky, who's our director for digital policy, learning, and compliance, share about some new resources for professional licensure compliance. So we will hear from Catherine towards the end of our meeting. So we're really pleased to have you all here. Thank you for being here. And as we normally start our meeting, we would like to welcome our new coordinators. So we have five new coordinators for this meeting. The first is Lindsay Thomas from Community Solution Education System. Welcome, Lindsay. My friend Jared Cutler from Sinclair Community College. Jared, I will be in touch. Marcia Miller from University of Kentucky. Linda Zong from Edgewood University, and Kate Broadfoot from Edgewood University. So we welcome our new coordinators to this group, and we hope that they will continue to join us each month as we have our meetings. So for this particular meeting, we ensure that we have created some very important information to share that our senior leaders would really benefit from learning from today. And so in doing that, I reached out to some wonderful friends who are members of SAN to be our SAN special guests. The first special guest that we're going to have today is Heather DeLange. And Heather is the director and the state portal entity contact for the Colorado Department of Higher Education. So Heather has worked with the Department of Higher Education since 2003 and has been overseeing the authorization of private degree granting institutions operating in Colorado since 2008. Heather graduated from Colorado State University with a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences and earned a Master of Arts in Higher Education Leadership and Administration from Adams State University. She is a longtime colleague, and I'm very pleased to be able to have her with us today because she recently completed her time working with the AHEAD Rule Committee. So the AHEAD Rulemaking Committee met in December and January. And so she's going to share with us a bit about lessons of process and policy in the development of regulations, addressing workforce Pell and program accountability metrics. So welcome, Heather. I know you're here somewhere.
I am.
There we are. And so Heather and I are going to have a bit of a chat. And so I'm really pleased to be able to have a chat with Heather about her rulemaking experience. And so, first off, Heather, I want to thank you so much for your service on the negotiated rulemaking. I know that is a daunting task to take on the regulatory matters as they're brought forward and coordinate with not only the department, but with the various key stakeholders that were a part of this rulemaking committee. And so, you served as the alternate representing state regulators, state authorizing agencies, and state higher education officers. So if I'm not mistaken, this is your first time serving on a rulemaking committee, am I right? And how did you prepare for that?
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl, and thanks to all of you for allowing me to be here. It's exciting to talk about this because it was a crazy couple of weeks for sure. So yes, this was indeed my first time serving. And since the pandemic, the pandemic provided opportunity for all of us to listen into negotiated rulemaking sessions. So I've been doing that. So I kind of had a vague idea of what it entailed, but like most things, you don't really know until you're in the throes. And so to be completely honest, I had no idea how to prepare for the week ahead. The regulatory text was not shared with us until the Thursday before we convened, which just made it was just more like a sprint then. So I think I finally was able to read, just based on my schedule, I was finally able to read the regulatory text Thursday afternoon, but then the meeting started with a governor's office staff and our own staff. And, I'd reached out to other people who I knew would have some input. I wanted to make sure that I really represented not only Colorado, but state agencies as well as I could. Our governor's office is extremely interested in the workforce Pell piece. And then our department had, specific interest in the total cost of attendance section. So it really was not difficult, but I really wanted to take with me that lens of the entirety of what my role was as this alternate negotiator, and also didn't really know how that would come to fruition. Would we tag team out back and forth between the primary, and so that didn't happen as much. And I don't know if I think it's probably administration specific, or even maybe even topic specific, but um, in order for the alternate to take the table, they would have to take that entire topic. And I didn't, especially during the workforce Pell piece, I didn't feel that comfortable with, I don't know much. I didn't know much about Pell going in. I knew, basics. So for this particular piece, I didn't feel comfortable, you know, ceding the alternate role to the primary. So he did most of the talking, but it was interesting just having all of this input to me through texts and emails and whispers, and and then trying to feed the primary, with maybe a different perspective from the alternate seat. So that part was interesting. It was certainly a frenzied, energetic time for which it's just hard to prepare.
Sure. And when you don't get the first issue paper until just a few days before, that is rather challenging. So, what's interesting, and people may remember that this particular rulemaking and the RISE committee were based upon statute that was just enacted last summer. So there was a lot of statutory text that kind of shared which way the committee needed to go. So they had some limitations on what they could do, but there's, the filler that you all had to address, to make it in a process that could work. And I think that was really interesting, how the department did that and set up the structure for you to address the issues, which just brings me to the next point then. So could you share a little bit about the topic areas addressed by the head committee and that structure? Because it was a unique structure developed to manage those big topic areas for this rulemaking. And is that typical, the way they handled that?
Sure. And I think before I get into the specific structure of that, I would say the overall theme that was provided by the department, I mean, it was repeated, and I'll probably repeat it myself to you because I think that's just even how I wrote my notes. But the goal, they kept saying, I mean, from the time of Nicholas Kent's initial welcome to us on that first day to middle of the week, but the goal really is to harmonize the current or the upcoming regulation to statute, and making sure that we stop the ping pong regulatory efforts, and really try to create something that's going to last and that is applicable to all sectors. And that kind of took a roller coaster approach, I would say, throughout the week. But anytime there was a question that maybe challenged something a little more ethereal, it would come back to that's not congressional intent, and this is what we need to be focused on. So there was a lot of, I would say, probably recentering and regrounding during the week, because there was still, pretty heavy opinions on what actually went into the bill, and then fighting for, well, what is congressional intent, and do they understand then what this is going to end up doing, for higher education in totality. So that, I think, sets the stage for really the tone of the entire week. But so the first topics, or the first week, was Pell, and then total cost of attendance, and then and workforce Pell. So those were the very specific topics that we were taking on in that first week. And then accountability, which really focuses, as you all know, on programs that do not result in a passing grade of the value-added earnings tests. And I think breaking them into 2 weeks made some sense, given the relatability, the relatedness of each of those topics. But if any of you have listened to Aaron Lacey's recaps and summaries, it really did feel like we were doing kind of two different NEGRIG sessions, because there was that vote at the end of the first week. I'm sure there's a lot of opinions on this, so please know that this is simply just mine. I think there were several reasons for piecing them out the way they did. I think workforce Pell, because it's been a long desired program in this space, and I think, other than a few kind of devilish details that was probably likely to reach consensus on its own. So I think taking that, then it could be a win, right, for the administration and for the department. I believe the accountability language was more divisive and needed more negotiations. I don't believe that needed more negotiations. It absolutely needed more negotiations to reach consensus. So I think it was the department's plan to ensure that workforce Pell language made it to consensus without this other piece, the accountability piece, maybe weighing it down or not getting it to consensus at the end of both of those weeks. I'd heard others say that they'd been involved in other NEGREG sessions that took votes for the entire regulatory package after the 2 weeks. Even if you go back, Aaron Lacey was a primary, and he went back several years. That was even talking about like these negotiations went over months and months. And so it was just that one vote for the entire package. And then I believe I heard somebody say that there were even votes at times for specific topics within the issue papers. So I don't, you asked if this is a typical way to do this. I don't know if there is any one typical way, I think, especially given different, flavors of administrations.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Heather, because there was a giant rulemaking in 2019 for the Trump administration that had so many pieces, that had several subcommittees that were feeding into the main committee to make determinations. And they voted on the whole shebang. And everybody thought that can't possibly get through. And then we moved to the Biden administration that separated it by issue. So we had cash management, we had gainful employment, we had certification procedures. They were all separated, which made it very interesting to see. And they did not reach consensus, even by bringing it down to the smaller topic area. Now, I've seen lots of thumbs up, thumbs down within the topics within an issue, but I have not seen topic consensus within an issue. So like state authorization wouldn't have a topic that went up or down and have that mean consensus. I've only seen state authorization as a whole, but who knows? They have a structure to develop so I think it's interesting. I think the administration in RISE, they did the whole thing, and then but when ahead, they were two different things because they made sense. So we have yet to see with the AIM committee. So we'll stay tuned. So thank you for that. So from your standpoint as a state regulator, so what would you say would be the biggest issue in each of those weeks, the issue that was covered, that you would advise institutions that you oversee to watch and prepare for change?
Sure. Thank you. I think for both sections, I think the number one thing is institutions just need to take an inventory of their programs, right? I think that is a number one. You've probably already done it, but I think even going into more detail about what those programs look like, where they are, I think there's a need to be very intentional as to what you offer. Know what options and limitations you have as an institution offering those programs. Do your programs pass the value-added earnings test? Additionally, the department often return. I go back. Here's my repetitiveness. I go back to the congressional intent of the statutory language, as well as harmonizing that language to the statute. They're aiming to create language again that will stand the test of time. And then create something that considers all sectors and institutions equally. So I think really making sure you know what you're offering and what those outcomes are. So I think that's number one. Specific to eligible workforce programs, do you have any programs right now that are eligible? If you look at that, do you have the data to support that? Are the programs successful? Are you completing 70% of your students? Are those students then placed into employment at a 70% or a higher rate? I think having all of that information, you really need to make sure that you meet all of those metrics, and they know that they're high. And obviously that's very intentional. And depending on the length of the program, and it may only be a few dollars. So there was a lot of conversation around the table, like, for some of these short programs, is it going to be worth it to institutions? Is it going to be worth it to students? and I think again, institutions just need to be super intentional on what you offer and how you offer it. Don't just jump into Workforce Pell because there's now this space to play. You don't have to create a program or modify a program then to meet those standards just to get those dollars. I think if you have something successful, continue doing what you know to be successful, and not just joining to join, right? You don't have to create anything just to play in the same sandbox. And then, do you have the capacity, where are the students that you offer these programs? Do you have the capacity to gather data for their success in your state, or, then maybe in another state, which then equals, their success equals your success. Do you know, and then I wrote, do you know where your students are? But then I wrote, that's kind of a facetious question, especially given the last 15 years of state authorization topics. You most definitely should know, right? If you're providing instruction for this program across state lines, is it a high need program in the state where the student's located? It may be a totally different, right? I mean, it's a totally different environment for employment and for those students. Do you have the governor's approval in the state where the student is located or where the institution is located? We'll get to a little bit more about that a little bit later. Does it make more sense to seek out a governor agreement, like the bilateral agreement, or simply obtain state authorization in that state where you have that student? Physical presence and all other state authorizations regulations still apply. So I think this is just yet another parallel pathway for you all to do the work that you do. But it's certainly the funnel's getting bigger for all of you to then disseminate out the data that comes with those students. Accountability is somewhat similar to Workforce Pell. What programs are you offering? How successful are they? How successful are the students? Are they finding work? Are they placed in related jobs? What data do you collect? What data do you need then to calculate that earnings test? I think you all have been through the gainful employment, and this is just the newest iteration of gainful employment. And each one comes with its own little flavor and its own calculation and all of that. But employment measures, just making sure that your completers and what employment they find is going to be tantamount to the success of both Workforce Pell and just plain accountability in general.
Great. So it's important to have those takeaways, and something that Heather started to touch on that, I want to follow up on has to do with making a distinction between state institutional approval, which many of you are using reciprocity through SARA for your institutional approval, but with Workforce Pell, we're talking about program approval, which is very different. So, just this group, since we deal with interstate distance education as our primary, type of issue, can you share how program approval might be addressed if the institution and the student are in two separate states, so that we can have a distinction between that we need to have institutional approval, but what are we doing about managing program approval, especially if we're an institution that offers a lot of interstate distance education to students located in a lot of different states?
Sure, and I hope I get there. I think there's a lot that's packed into these two things, right? And so re-guide me if I tend to detract or sway or get off the highway. And so again, like going back to that governor approval. So for Workforce Pell, there's an option for a bilateral agreement between governors. So Workforce Pell is program specific. So I think, that is the program eligible, and that is in federal regulation. So really making sure, like Cheryl was just saying, just that's program. So take away, any SARA or any reciprocity that you have right now, like just focus on the program. So in this bilateral agreement between governors, so the governors and I apologize, but I'm pulling directly from the regulatory text because I don't want to misspeak. And so governors from 2 or more states may enter into an agreement, which has to be published publicly, regarding the enrollment of students located in the other state, so long as, one, the governor in the state in which the student is located, in consultation with the State Board of Workforce, includes the occupation or sector on the list developed. And so all of this then also refers to other sections, which I'll get to. And then number 2, the governor of the state in which the institution offering such programs is located has determined, in consultation with their State Board of Workforce, that the program meets the conditions under, and it's 34 CFR 690.93. And bilateral agreement includes provisions for data sharing among the states for the purposes of completion and placement rate calculations. So I think that's the more typical. I mean, that's regulatorily, that is where we sit. So that is that governor agreement. However, super important, this agreement among the governors does not replace, supersede, or preclude authorization in that state. And I think that's where a lot of conflation can live. The institution may still need to seek authorization in the state, depending on what activities are going on in that state. So, it's just super important to remember that all state authorization regulations still apply in addition to this other agreement with the governors, because that is really just for the eligibility of Workforce Pell, the eligibility and allocation, then I would say, of Workforce Pell to those students.
I think you explained it great. So I think you explained it great. I think the issue is that it has so many parallels to other types of things that we talk about how you have to have institutional approval, which can be done through reciprocity or state to state. And then we have these other things that might be responsibilities of the institution. So I remember you talk about the congressional intent, and that was said often that it was meant to be, state specific. So maybe a bilateral was sufficient, but getting broader than that would take away from the congressional intent for purposes of for not only the type of program that's important to the state, but also in the development of the data that has to support that. So, so thank you for making that distinction. And I hope we can keep sharing that, because you're right, there's a lot of conflation that keeps happening. And so we'll do what we can to try to help piece it apart. I'm hoping, somebody asked me, well, the Workforce Pell regs are sitting over at for OIRA review right now. So we anticipate that language will come out as proposed. And you remember how in the beginning there's a lot of analysis. So I'm hoping that they cover a bunch of that, within the analysis, because then that will help us piece it apart.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would just, for all of you, when the NPRM comes out, really make sure you look at it and provide comment. If you see something that is regulatory, which is challenging in the regulatory sense, not the statutory sense, right? So don't waste your time on sending anything that has anything to do with the statute itself. It's not moving. We know that, and they made it very, very clear that they don't want to read any comments that have anything to do with statute. So I think,
that was such a great piece of advice, because this committee had direction very specific in statute that they had to go along with. And so the regulations, that can be massaged a little, but the statutory language is not. And statute is, we start with statutes, and then it's either implied or direct that a regulation can be developed to implement the statute. So we need to be cognizant of that as we develop our public comments. So Heather, thank you so much for being with us today. Is there one last piece of advice that you would like to give us to end our chat today?
Yeah, I think, the couple of things that I came up with is really just, if you can, strengthen your state level approval and workforce alignment. I don't know exactly how to do it, but I think if you just work with your Department of Higher Ed, your Department of Employment, or your workforce department, I think that is where we're all going to find success. And then I think, again, going back and looking at your programs, align your program tuition if you can, with expected value added earnings. And then, just really make sure that you're paying attention on a regular basis as to how your programs are doing with regard to your student outcomes.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. This was just wonderful information. You all know this was recorded. I know I'm going to go back and listen to Heather's direction, from this recording. So thank you so much, Heather, for being with us today. This was a great, we could talk for much longer about this because there's so many nuances, but thank you for trying to boil it down to us in a quick piece of time, so that we can get a better understanding. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again. Okay, so Heather has, brought us what has occurred. This Department of Education has had several rulemakings. They come up with wonderful names, so they're in these buckets. So we've had they started naming them with the RISE committee. The first one about public service loan forgiveness didn't have a fancy name, but starting with the RISE committee, then the AHEAD committee, and now as we look forward, we're seeing that the Department of Education has their intention of having yet another rulemaking in April and May. The opportunity to submit nominations for this upcoming rulemaking that came out a few weeks ago, and that nomination period will close on Thursday. But we know what the department intends to cover in general. And so we reached out to our wonderful colleague, Leah Matthews. So Leah, we're really appreciative of you being here today. She's the executive director of DEAC. And so, we work with her on a pretty regular basis. So Leah, thank you so much, for being here with us. I'm going to give I'll try to move through. She has a wonderful bio. So just to share with you, she's been the executive director since April of 2013. Previously, she was with CHIA, the National Coordinating Organization of Higher Education Accrediting Organizations. She's worked with, she served nearly 12 years on the staff of the Accrediting Commission for Career Schools and Colleges. And prior to joining ACCSC, she worked for 5 years as a civilian based on the U.S. Army Japan headquarters in Zama, Japan, which is fascinating, where she directed family support services and education programs for children and youth. She's taught several years in the Baltimore City school system. She also has been a negotiator, so she can give us some inside information about how that works, so that we have she's served on the as a negotiator and as a subcommittee negotiator. Did they call him a subcommittee? A member of the subcommittee that fed into the 2019 rulemaking, which was so large that they really needed this subcommittee to help bring all these issues together around distance education and innovation. So, we're so pleased to have you. Again, I could go on. She's just wonderful. She was a board member on NC Sarah from 2016 to 21. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Music and Education from Westminster College, and has a Master of Public Administration from University of Oklahoma, and her PhD in Higher Education from George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, where I was raised. So anyway, so all of that, Leah, thank you so much for being here to be able to chat with us today about what you are anticipating as we look forward to the AIM committee.
Right. Well, the AIM committee is going to be focused solely on higher education accreditation. Prior rulemaking sessions tend to put accreditation as one topic among many, but this time the department is really focusing in on accreditation. And I think that there are sort of 4 areas of focus that are being looked at by the Department of Education. The focus 1 is sort of a fixation on where we are as a country with student loan debt. And the student loan debt, just from the federal lending system, is approaching $1.7 trillion. And that is really on the mind of this administration for the impact that has on the economy, the impact that has on graduates from college to be able to participate in obtaining a mortgage or buying a car or participating in the economy. So there's a lot of concern about $1.7 trillion in federal student loan debt. That doesn't count the private lending that's out there as well. It's really raising the question for this particular administration on return on investment. And what is accreditation doing to assure appropriate return on investment for the programs of study for which individuals are taking out federal loans? Accreditation has never been asked to look at return on investment. Traditionally, at least over the last 100 years or so, accreditation has been very focused on inputs. What does the curriculum look like? What are the faculty qualifications? What are the research support structures within an institution? What's its financial viability? What's its plans for the future? How is it assessing its own effectiveness in achieving institution mission? What are the admissions criteria used to determine students that are eligible for these programs? Accreditation has been very, very focused on assessing education quality from the standpoint of what is the institution offering right now. It has never put a major lens on all programs looking at return on investment. Now, my good friend Heather DeLange, who did a wonderful job on her presentation. Thanks, Heather. If you're still there, hello. Hope all is well with you. She mentioned gainful employment, which was a multi-year strategy to try to get at career and technical programs preparing graduates for a specific occupation to obtain a position or a profession in that field. Return on investment conversations are taking a much broader approach, and it's raising concerns for programs like social worker, addiction treatment services, K-12 education teachers, counselors, that generally may not have the type of return on investment that we might see from an electrical engineer or somebody in one of the STEM fields. So there's going to be a lot of conversations around the table at AIM about how we would implement an ROI feature of accreditation without doing harm to social good, social work, and as a society, what we need from trained professions in areas and in fields that not necessarily hitting ROI metrics. Certainly, accreditation needs to change. If you've followed anything in sort of the news cycle lately, Nicholas Kent has certainly laid out an agenda for accreditation. He has certainly called out accreditation for where he thinks it can certainly improve. And I agree. There's places for accreditation to improve. And I think that this next negotiated rulemaking is really going to drill down, Cheryl, into these areas where accreditation can improve. I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, Cheryl, that I thought there were going to be 4. So I've mentioned 2: student loan debt, the concerns about that, accountability and ROI. I think there's going to be conversations at AIM about moving more authority and quality assurance review to the states. At least that's what I've been hearing. I haven't seen it in any working paper or in print as a formal proposal, but certainly if you have listened to the commentary coming out of the Department of Education, there is a lot of interest in moving more authority reviews to the state. Now, I know those people on this webinar are already dealing with multiple hats and multiple responsibilities at their institutions, and they're working with states and state representatives like Heather, who have a lot of hats that they're wearing. So the idea of moving more authority to the states would certainly need very thoughtful consideration about how that gets implemented, the resources that would be needed to do that, and potentially what exactly that accreditation does that would be transitioned to a state role. So if those conversations are taking place at AIM, I would invite this community to really pay attention. Cheryl will certainly be circulating to you the AIM conversations and what's taking place around that table as it relates to accreditation and quality assurance. And then Cheryl, the 4th area that I think that this AIM NAGREG is going to consider is sort of reducing administrative and bureaucratic burdens. Accreditation has a lot of red tape to its process. And I think this administration wants to see accreditors more focused on student learning outcomes, the results of those outcomes as students are entering the workforce, and maybe not as much about how many days are you taking to approve additional locations and spending time on substantive changes and who is reviewing them and that kind of a thing. All of these changes, as somebody who has been in the accreditation field for 25 years, I'm very interested in and supportive of having conversations about them. I just hope that the practical implications continues to support students achieving their goals. I mean, that's what we want, is we want students to have the access and the resources and the education quality to help them achieve what they want for their future.
Wow, that I'm processing. So I think it's really interesting. You've shared a number of things from the perspective of the accreditor and also the perspective of states. So that kind of brings me into talking about the integrity triad. So the program integrity triad, I'm wondering, states should be paying attention to how this should work, but how will that affect, do you see, state oversight of institutions and their programs if we're seeing a shift? And will accreditors then be working with the states to make that occur? What do you visualize as could be the process to make that work?
I don't want to speak out of turn because I saw Heather turned her camera on again. Hey, Heather. There could be a more intentional collaboration between accreditors and states if we're going to get into ROI, and we're going to have to get into student level data that provides sort of the evidence we need to track that student from their institutional experience, potentially into a state where they're employed in their field to sort of assess that return on investment. We don't have a framework yet for how we're going to do this.
Right.
I think accreditors potentially will have a more meaningful interaction with states if accreditors are going to have to look more carefully at return on investment. And Heather, I'm wondering, I saw your note in the chat, wondering if you had any thoughts about state role on return on investment.
Well, I do, and I didn't want to jump, I didn't want to step on your toes either. But Cheryl, when you mentioned federal triad, then I figured, well, at least there's two of us here. But I think it's interesting that there is this movement to the states, because most states are not. We do not have the infrastructure for this. And I mean, then state law comes into play, and right now I have, our gubernatorial administration is not interested in some of the things that I would like him to be interested in. So, I think it's balancing all of that. So I think, there's a reason that the federal level, the triad existed, is because we do have these very specific roles, and not one entity or not one of those sectors can take on all. And it will still be verified, kind of this big brother, babysitting system at the federal level too. So I can't see it being that successful the way we have it right now.
Well, Heather, as this AIM conversation starts, and as states like yourself, state representatives like yourself are paying attention, whoever is around the table in NEGREG really needs a direct channel of communication with you. Because whoever is around that table needs to give the states a voice. I'm hoping there's a state representative on the AIM NEGREG. I'm sure there certainly would be, right? If we're going to talk about offloading, transitioning functions to states, you should have a voice at that table, right? If that is not the case for a reason I would not be able to understand, I would want to see a good line of communication between the states and the negotiators about those conversations.
Totally agree. So just to try to sum some of this up for the purposes of our members, you brought up a really good point, Leah, that we don't know exactly where they're going to be going. We know the 10 goals that they shared that was part of the initial notice. But, we knew from RISE, we knew from AHEAD, they were addressing things that came directly from the recently enacted reconciliation bill. So this is a little different. We're going back in, we're retooling things that are already in regulation. Certainly they're statutory based, but they already have regulation that is being amended and directed. So for our members, how might new and amended regulations affect institutions, and how should institutions begin to prepare?
Well, if ROI really gets legs in regulation and it really becomes something your accreditor has to implement at a program level basis. And one of the points of this administration is they're not looking at sort of a lump sum that was awkwardly phrased, but in IPEDS generally we summarize an institution's outcomes. They're digging into program level outcomes. So if you're an institution, start looking at your program enrollment, your program viability, start engaging with employment communities. Are you offering programs to students that is going to give them a return on investment? And this is for federal lending. If you have programs that have privately sourced tuition payments or individuals that don't need federal loans, then maybe you can keep them. But if you have programs that are languishing in student enrollments, potentially languishing in outcomes, uncertain return on investment, and those programs are sourcing federal financial aid dollars to pay for tuition, as an institution, you should start looking at those and really having hard conversations about the viability of those programs continuing at your institution. Those are really hard conversations to have because some of these programs and curriculum and faculty have invested lifetimes, right, into their development. And but the direction things are headed, folks, to really be practical is the federal government doesn't want to lend money for students to take programs that's not going to get them into an employability status that repays that loan. $1.7 trillion in loan debt, unlike anywhere else in the world. It's nowhere else like that outside the US. Okay. And it's really starting to have an impact on the economy here. And this administration wants to do something about it. So that's, Cheryl, sort of the sobering recommendation that I would have as an institution right now is to start looking at these programs and get ahead of it before it happens to you, because an accreditor or a state starts asking those questions. You should ask them before they're brought to you by a regulator. Sorry.
No. Thank you very much. I think it's important for our members to, pay attention to this and follow where we're moving with this. There will be two rulemaking weeks, one in April, one in May, that address this. And much like Heather was talking, we will get what they call an issue paper the week before the rulemaking starts. And we certainly, as a member organization, SAN and WCET, will be sharing out what this looks like. For those of you that are following our policy, we created the new policy tracker. That's a separate website. You can find that linked from the SAN website and the WCET website. Plus, we have the monthly policy report the 15th of each month. So we will keep following this, Leah, and help people understand how this affects them. So I'd love to give you, would you mind summing up any ideas you have for us to move forward?
We're all swinging on a pendulum, right? Every time there's a negotiated rulemaking, the accreditors pivot, the institutions pivot, the states pivot, and then another administration comes along and does something different. And so part of what this work is and what's so important about these conversations, Cheryl, is to understand we're swinging on a pendulum. And we're trying to manage our work, and we're trying to do good things, and we're trying to serve students between very different ideological pursuits in higher education. So just, hang on, stay tuned into Cheryl Dowd and her team at SAN, stay engaged with your states like Heather, and really, pay attention and try to make good choices about where to put your resources in this never-ending cycle of regulatory development and review.
And it feels like it's just every year is something new with this.
Well,
But
really, if you're a policy wonk,
Right.
you're loving this.
Yeah,
If you really just want to be focused in on students and learning and program development and curriculum content, it's hard
right.
to find the time.
Well, and especially when you're working with folks that are developing faculty, the faculty who's developing courses and opportunities for students, they want to put their head down and get work done. And having to pivot is very challenging, and they don't necessarily always understand that this has
Mhm.
occurred and say we didn't used to have to do this.
I
We
know.
hear that often. So
Don't say that anymore.
I know that for sure. So, Leah, thank you so much for being with us today. This was
Welcome.
a very special conversation. Leah and Heather, both of you, thank you for these very special conversations today. We're going to finish our call by asking Catherine if she will come on, please, and tell us a little bit about some new professional licensure related resources that SAN has put out. One's public facing and one is just a SAN member only that go along with our long list of professional licensure resources because we know this topic is confusing and you need the opportunity to have a review of what you can do for compliance management at your institutions and also share with your senior leaders, especially this report that she's going to talk about. So Catherine, on to you.
Yes, thank you, and hi everyone. I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about two recent licensure resources from SAN, our professional licensure survey report, as Cyril mentioned, but also our member-only nursing program state-specific requirements chart, and then how they fit into SAN's broader licensure resource toolkit. As Cheryl said, we have many resources, so I'll be sure to point you in the direction of those. But first, to talk just a little bit about the survey. First, many of you participated in or helped share the survey, so I want to thank you for that and sharing your perspective. I also think that we might have a couple of leaders in the field that might have been on the call that helped contribute in reviewing the survey report and really helped distill final information. So if Miranda Hines and Kristen Brown were on the call, just want to give them a shout out and thank you for them for that. But the goal of the report and of the survey was really to, learn more about the impact of licensure compliance and then to make it visible what I'm sure many of you experience every day, which is that licensure compliance is increasingly complex and the workload is growing. And professional licensure compliance has maybe kind of quietly, depending on the institution, on the person, it's become a really complex and time intensive and sometimes high risk responsibility in higher education compliance. So just a few kind of takeaways from the survey. It's really it's really complex and it's very structural in nature. The institutions are tracking requirements across dozens, and in some case every, United States jurisdiction with those licensing boards, and those licensing boards have different terminology, different rules. It can be really hard to keep track of all of that to do the work that's necessary. Another is just that the workload is increasing. More than 85% of institutions reported a moderate or significant workload increase in the last couple years, especially in light of recent federal changes. Another important insight is that much of the work is still manual. Spreadsheets, shared docs, and email are common tools. Some institutions are able to leverage other tools, but that's not the case in all. And so, the workload can feel differently at different institutions. Another very important takeaway is that institutions must make independent determinations. Licensing boards typically don't evaluate or confirm, determinations about whether a student can be eligible for licensure in a state. And that really makes this a risk assessment in a sense for institutions instead of a state process that they're able to follow. And lastly, but importantly, it's the possibility that students can be affected. The survey results show that about 1/3 of institutions reported restricting enrollment in at least one state or program due to this, licensure compliance, the uncertainty, or just the difficulty in coming into full compliance. So the survey gave us the big picture, and if it's not in the chat, I'll be sure to share the links to all of these. So kind of seeing the big picture of what the work entails, we really dived in deep to build this nursing chart to support our members. Like I said, it's a member-only resource that maps state-level program approvals, clinicals, and faculty requirements that might affect nursing programs that are operating across state lines. And as Cheryl mentioned, there's a distinction between institutional approval, which may be covered by your SARA participation or by a direct institutional approval from a state. These are board approvals that are specific to profession, specific to each state. So they can really add up in terms of work, and there's not a reciprocity agreement to cover anything like that. But with the chart, it's really designed to be a starting point to help institutions identify where deeper state level review might be warranted. But I think importantly with the chart, building the chart really kind of shows why the work in the survey is so challenging. So in reviewing the state statutes and regulations and agency guidance to build the chart and share what we can to be helpful, it really became clear, that some states clearly address out-of-state programs or out-of-state experiential learning and how that impacts and how that shows up in regulations. Others have approval rules that don't really explicitly mention how their rules apply to online or out-of-state programs. So in these cases, institutions are really working in gray areas where they're trying to determine what applies, how the rules are interpreted, and then how to document all of this. And that kind of complexity is exactly what we saw in the survey. So why these resources matter, it's really just taking together the survey and chart, validate the work that's being done and show that licensure is complex because the regulatory environment is complex. But what we really hope that they'll do and why they matter is we really hope they'll help institutions move to structured and proactive compliance approaches. The survey highlights where institutions are, maybe feeling some pressure, where there's challenges, and the chart provides a practical tool to help institutions, start organizing and understanding state level program requirements. And these two resources don't just stand alone. They build on the professional licensure tools that SAN already has developed on the Getting Started page. And we have resources that cover understanding the federal professional licensure disclosure requirements, developing and documenting review processes, and then having practical examples developed by SAN and also by SAN member institutions as part of the professional licensure SIT. So we really hope that these two resources especially can help you by explaining the scope of licensure work to your leadership, identify where deeper state review might be needed, build a shared understanding across your campus, and then just learn some insights on how to document what your findings are. We'll continue to expand resources in this area to best support our members. We're exploring similar resources to the nursing chart for areas like teacher preparation and mental health programs. And our SIT has many innovative and practical resources in development that they're excited about sharing once those are complete. If you have any insights or updates or examples from your institution, we really invite you to share them with us because your experiences help strengthen these tools for the whole community. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Cheryl.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Catherine. And so those links that were put in the chat, as well as the Getting Started page, which will get you to the chart and to the survey report, which are very important pieces of information. You'll notice that, we work often with our friends at the HELP organization with Chris Mall. And they have been noting that it is important to know that what is happening at the institutions and sharing with senior leaders how this is working. And very specifically, a concern that we've talked about often is that institutions are making those determinations about satisfying state educational requirements without affirmation from licensing boards because there isn't a process for that. So we're working together. We're going to keep providing opportunities to learn together and move forward. So thank you all for being with us today. We're right at top of the hour. So I'm so grateful to Heather DeLange and to Leah Matthews to being with us today, and also Catherine for sharing this information, and of course to Leah Wade, who always is helping us in the background here to make sure we go smoothly. So wonderful to be with you all today. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll see you again next month. Have a wonderful day, everybody.